Swing states, both new and old, will weigh heavily on the outcome of the 2020 presidential race. Both candidates have kept a sharp eye on Pennsylvania. Joe Biden has spent much of the last 24 hours in the state where he grew up. President Trump swung through earlier this week for a rally as well. The state's 20 electoral votes are at the forefront of the battle over mail-in ballots. The president and his team have already threatened legal action. And a new battleground is emerging in the South. Texas, a state that has not voted for a Democrat since 1976, is seeing record turnout. The Lone Star State has already surpassed its 2016 vote total before Election Day. Democrats have invested heavily in the hopes this is the year Texas will flip blue. For more on these crucial battleground states, I want to bring in John Delano and Renuka Rayasam. John is the money and politics editor for our Pittsburgh station, KDKA. That's where he joins us from tonight. And Renuka covers Texas politics, policy, and healthcare for Politico. She is in El Paso. Welcome to you both. John, let me start with you and the president's legal threats in Pennsylvania. What are his claims or concerns with the state's ballot counting, and what are we hearing from officials there?
Well, Elaine, thank you. First of all, always great to be with you. There have been over a half-dozen lawsuits filed by Republican members of Congress, Republican state legislators, the Trump campaign, and other Republicans in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania over the last several weeks. Now, every one of those lawsuits has been fought back, and they have lost. They've been over issues that are kind of moot now, like drop boxes, for example, or whether to have poll watchers at some of the sites before today's election day. But the real question going forward is a state Supreme Court ruling that says that basically ballots that are postmarked as of today can still be counted on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday of this week, as long as they were postmarked as of today, Election Day. That particular ruling by the state Supreme Court is receiving furious contests by local Republicans, state Republicans, who basically argue that this is not part of state law, and they're right about that. This is the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania saying it's a right that citizens have because the U.S. Postal Service is so screwed up. And that's the bottom line on that one. And that lawsuit, of course, could go on well past Election Day. We don't really know yet how many votes that's going to affect. But, of course, Pennsylvania is arguing if you voted by mail by Election Day, your vote should be counted.
All right. So speaking of challenges, Renuka, Texas's Republican Party tried to challenge twice some 127,000 votes cast at drive-through locations in Harris County, a Democratic stronghold that includes Houston. What was the basis of that challenge, and why did the judge even decide to take the case so close to the election?
Yeah, those are great questions. So a couple of GOP operatives filed a lawsuit against these drive-through polling sites, and these are tents, about 10 tents that were set up where people could sort of get their ballot and drop them off. And the GOP had argued that these were not permanent structures, that you could only vote in buildings, and it comes down to whether, I think, as you know, in the case in Pennsylvania or some of these other cases, who gets to make these decisions about how voting gets carried out. And a lot of it is that these local officials, can they make these rules about, whether a tent counts as a permanent structure, a car counts as a permanent structure, or that's an appropriate voting location. It's a good question why the judge took this so close to Election Day. This is already a challenge that was in state court. He threw it out on procedural grounds. He said that the GOP operatives here who filed the suit don't have standing to bring this suit. But he also cautioned he has no idea what's going to happen in the appeal here. And so the clerk of Harris County has actually closed 9 of those 10 drive-through voting centers. There's just one open on the chance that an appeals court says that those votes don't count after all. 127,000 votes that were cast, that's about 10% of Harris County's total early voting counts so far.
John, let me turn back to you. I know you've been covering Pennsylvania politics for what, decades, fair to say?
That's why I have the gray hair.
So remind our viewers of the importance of Pennsylvania when it comes to winning the White House. And also, what information, if any, are we going to actually have tonight, which could indicate who might be in the lead in your state?
Yeah. These are all great questions. You know, Pennsylvania with 20 electoral votes is not as big as Texas, but we are so bellwether. We go any which way. And along with Wisconsin and Michigan, these three states delivered the White House to Donald Trump. And Joe Biden knows that he needs to win Pennsylvania. The last Democrat to win the White House without Pennsylvania was Harry S. Truman in 1948. So we are a must-win state for the Democrats, and they want to deny Trump this state. Now, looking at where the votes are, we're such a big state and we're so diverse. Obviously, African-Americans, suburban women, and white working-class Democrats are key constituencies. So we're looking at Philadelphia. Will there be a larger black turnout for Joe Biden than there was for Hillary Clinton? Biden needs that. He needs the suburban women around Philadelphia, as well as out here in Pittsburgh. And then there are all these Democratic counties in my neck of the woods, western Pennsylvania, that voted for Donald Trump. White working class folks voted for Trump. Biden is trying to win them back. We're going to watch that constituency very closely out here in western Pennsylvania.
You know, Renuka, it really is true. Everything's sort of bigger in Texas, but what or who is driving that record turnout in your state?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You said at the top of the segment, at 9.7 or 8 million people voted early in Texas. That is more than the entire turnout in 2016. And so much of that is new voters. So about 4 million residents moved to Texas in the past decade. That's more than the population of about 24 states. And so we have a lot of new voters. They're moving to the suburbs. We also have a lot of young voters coming of age. I actually spent some time a couple of weeks ago at some of the polling locations in El Paso, and I was surprised at the number of first-time voters, really young people who are 18, 19, just now eligible to vote. And voting, and the traditional, typical sort of political wisdom is that young people don't vote. They wait a while before they start going to the polls and before they kind of make that a priority. But this year we're seeing sort of record numbers of people under 30 voting. And like I said, a lot of these new residents in the state, and Texas has historically been a state with really low voter turnout, often some of the lowest voter turnout in the entire country. And that's completely changed this year. And that will be one of the big stories to watch going forward. Can the state sustain that type of turnout where people are really motivated and going to the polls, or is this going to be a one-time bump?
Well, John Delano and Renuka Rayasam, there is so much interest in your states. Thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.